This section, the life cycle of board activities, looks at how the board uses its time during different stages of the organisation's life cycle. Organisations are never static, they're always changing. As an organisation changes, grows, and develops frameworks for decision making, as well as dealing with issues that arise, the board use their time differently. In Module 1, at the face-to-face session, we looked at where the board's attention was focused. The trigger model on page 13 of the workbook, which is shown here, looked at how much the board's time was spent looking at discussing the future versus looking at the past and present. From the model, we also talked about the time spent looking externally as well as Mithaka internally, and the compliance versus the performance of the organisation. It might be good for you to take time to review your workbook to see how you answered the question. As a board, do you have the right balance of where your attention is focused for this point in Mithaka's development? Sometimes this is talked about more simply by whether the board is focusing on strategy or operations. Strategy is the plan of action to achieve an organisation's goals over time, which takes into account a broad range of possibilities. Operations is carrying out the work to achieve the plan, usually undertaken by staff or volunteers other than the board. In changing stages of the life cycle, the amount of time the board spends in strategy and operations varies. This graph shows what an established organisation with good policy, risk and decision-making framework might look like in the amount of time they spend on operational detail versus the strategy. The first dip into operational discussion or involvement might be a significant event or crisis, which is dealt with quickly. This prevents the damage from being long-term in the case of a crisis, or getting things done in the case of work needing to be completed. The second event is a more minor one, where policies and good decision-making have prevented it from the board having to become involved. The next slide shows a different life cycle stage. This life cycle stage is more reflective of an organisation without staff or with only one or two staff, where the board members are also involved in operations to ensure plans are being implemented. This doesn't mean the organisation is not working well, just under-resourced. The short amount of time the board are working in the operational zone indicate that the organisation has good frameworks in place. It's clear that due to the lack of operational staff or volunteers outside of the board members, that the board are using much of their valuable time on the here and now rather than the future focus or the strategy. The next slide shows a different story. This slide is typical of a small under-resourced organisation which is not dealing with issues or ensuring work is done in a timely manner. Sometimes as a result of the organisation being under pressure and in the operational zone, further issues or crises arise which makes it difficult for the board to focus on the future and see progress. This state also results in board members becoming burnt out, where they're spending lots of time doing operational activities. Sometimes the board become accustomed to talking about operations and forget that the situation is over. Rather than moving back to focus on strategy, they lurk around in the operational detail. In this slide, reflecting on Mithaka's life cycle stage, as a board, do you have the right balance of where your attention is focused at this point in Mithaka's development? Is it more in strategy or more in operations? From here, head back to the module and answer some of the questions that are more reflective questions about where you are at this point in time.